Welcome to the 2012 Candidates Forum. I'm Ann Whitman, the program moderator. This segment features the candidates running for the state senate in the 34th senatorial district. The format will be as follows. The first part of the program will consist of questions asked of the candidates by members of the local media, including the New Haven Register, the Record Journal, and students from Mark T. Sheehan High School. The second part will allow each candidate to make a closing statement. During the question and answer portion of the program, each candidate will have 2 minutes to respond. The opposing candidate will be allowed 1 minute for rebuttal. To conclude the program, each candidate will have 3 minutes to make closing remarks. A toss of the coin has determined the order of questioning. Before beginning the questioning, I'd like to introduce the candidates running for the state senate in the 34th senatorial district. They are Leonard Fasano, Republican; Steve Fontana, Democrat; Luther Trammell of the New Haven Register will ask the first question of Len Fasano.
Len, let's talk mass transit. You have a situation in the district here where you have the high-speed rail between New Haven and Springfield that's coming through. In another part of the state, you have the busway, which a lot of members of the Republican Party have railed against as a boondoggle. I'd like to know where you stand on those two projects, and if you support the high-speed rail but don't support the busway, how do you jibe those two positions?
Sure. Luther, thank you for the question. First of all, I want to thank the Wallingford community women for putting on this, hosting this event. I want to thank all of you for coming here, and I want to thank Ann for being the moderator and Mr. Fontana for participating. As far as the rail system, I am in favor of the rail system from New Haven to Springfield. I think that's a worthwhile endeavor. I know we're going to have a train station here in Wallingford that the money's already been secured for, and I know in North Haven we have a location picked out. There's some rough plans, but we don't have the necessary funds at this time. I think we need to look at mass transit to move a lot of traffic off of 91, 84, 95, and I think this is going to go a long way to it. I think that we have seen from the East Railroad, Shoreline East, that people have used it. It is something that you get accustomed to. I know that the train station currently going on, or the route going up to Hartford, the times are off. It leaves at 9 o'clock from Wallingford, and you can't get to work on time. So that's been a problem. So I think if we get rid of that with the new system, it'll be better. As far as the busway, no, I don't think that's a good project. It's $112 million out of state funds. It's almost $1,000 an inch to build this thing. I think that from all reports, it's going to cost us $8 million plus a year just to pay for the ongoing yearly expenses. So I have not seen any figures that suggest to me that this is going to be a good mode of transportation between New Britain and Hartford. So I think we'd use that money in other areas and maybe even other transportation projects, but I don't think that ridership on the bus is going to work.
Thank you. Mr. Fontana?
Thank you. I'd like to start also by thanking Ann and the Wallingford Community Women, all of you for coming, the panelists, Wallingford Public Access for taping this, and everybody watching at home. I've been a longtime supporter of mass transit, Luther. I supported it from the first time I got up to the Capitol in '97 because I understood that ultimately we were going to need to have a convenient, comprehensive mass transit system in the state. So I supported it because you can create jobs in the short term through construction. I support it because long-term train stations are hubs of economic activity. If you go to Boston or Atlanta or DC or anywhere else where there are train or subway stations, they promote economic activity. They're certainly more convenient for consumers and give people more options. And beyond that, they respond effectively to the increasing likelihood that over time, gasoline prices are going to rise and rise dramatically. And people are going to want to have alternatives in place to afford to get to their jobs, commute to shopping or doctors or what have you. So I've always supported mass transit. I'm looking forward to supporting the train stations in Wallingford and North Haven. And finally, I would have preferred something other than the busway. It's better than nothing, but I would prefer a train system.
Thank you
to the busway.
very much.
Thank you.
The next question is from Luisa Alves of Martesian High School to Steve Fontana.
Because the state union workers are a vital part of any budget, explain how you would tell the union leadership that they must take less in pay and benefits in order to balance the state budget.
Well, Louisa, you don't tell the state unions anything. As you may know, there are contracts with all the state employee unions, and those contracts are collectively bargained and negotiated between the unions and the state as represented by the governor. So the governor has the authority, the jurisdiction to negotiate directly with the unions over those kinds of things. In 1997, Governor Rowland negotiated with the unions, and he came up with a 20-year plan over pensions, health care, and other sorts of work-related issues. In order to get out of the jam we were in over the last couple of years, Governor Malloy reopened those agreements and extended them, I think, for a few years. But he had to do that with the agreement of the unions. He couldn't unilaterally tell them he was going to do that. He had to negotiate with them. It is true he has the ability to lay people off, and he threatened that as a possibility if they didn't negotiate in good faith. But you can't just tell the unions what it is that they should do. I think what the unions have done in this state, truthfully, is they've stepped up. They stepped up in '97, and they stepped up again last year when we had to get out of a huge jam. So I think the unions have demonstrated that they want to be a part of a solution. And in fact, I think the solution they came up with was certainly better than what we had before they sat down and worked out things together. But I think the way it works is you negotiate things with people, and ultimately you get to a better place. Now, can we improve on what we came up with last year? Sure, we can come up with better ways to save money on healthcare costs, perhaps to deal with longevity and merit pay issues. So there are ways that we can do things to improve things, but we have to negotiate in good faith on a level playing field. We're not in a situation where we just tell them anything.
Mr. Fasano?
Thank you. I think that Governor Malloy had an excellent opportunity to change the face of the way we pay union employees. I think that the union did come to the table, and I think that the union did say, let's talk, because we recognize the problems that we face. But I think that would have been a time to open up their doors to say, what are we going to do in the future? Not for current employees with the state, because I don't think we should change the rules on either retired or current employees with the state. But I think we need to talk about the rules for future employees. The longevity pay, for instance, which is after 10 years, you get an extra bonus. We just paid them out a couple weeks ago. But for new employees, I think we need to take a look at that. We need to take a look at the merit pay. But that was the time to do it, because we're not going to have another time to look at these issues for future employees. Once again, not current, because a deal's a deal, and you sign a contract, you reach an agreement, you got to live by those terms, good or bad, that's what you have to do. But I think for future employees, we need to look at these other avenues to save money on healthcare costs, to save money on longevity payments, and to save money on merit pay.
Thank you. Denise Perez of Martesian High School will ask the next question of Len Fasano.
We know that there will be a leaner budget for the state of Connecticut this coming year. It is evident that not every program can continue to receive adequate funding to continue operation. What specific programs do you plan to cut, and how much would be saved by their elimination?
Thank you. I think that the question is not cutting program. The question really, in my view, for state government is consolidation. I think there's two things that we need to do with the state budget. Number one, we need to look at those programs that we're funding and figure out what is the benefit that we're receiving from the dollars that we put in. How many people are in the program? Is it benefiting those folks? Is there a duplicative program that we can combine two programs? For instance, we have another number of programs for people who get released from prison, who are in prison. We have programs under our educational system, and we have programs under our criminal justice system. We can combine those programs and save money. That's something we should look at. We have to look at the fact of looking at privatizing. There was a report done, the Program Review and Investigations, which is a bipartisan, equal number of Republicans, equal number of Democrats, that looked at services for health services for the elderly who the state is paying for. Some of it is done by the state, some of it's done privately. And the PRI report indicated that these services can be done at a less expensive rate and better in a private sector. And there was a move to move that to a private sector. There's also a hospital in New Britain that that has only like, I think, 14 or 15 patients in it at $1 million a year per patient. Those patients need treatment, but we can move them to Yale and UConn, who's agreed to take them, for less than half the cost. Those are types of things I think we could look at in terms of programs and start to consolidate the money that we're spending. But to do that takes the will and takes the initiative. And right now in the Capitol, with the majority, there is not a will and initiative to do these things. And that's been the holdup.
Mr. Fontana?
A couple of points. First, I've been a longtime supporter of what's called results-based accountability, which basically asks 3 questions of every state program. How much are we getting? How well are we doing it? And is anybody better off? And that needs to be done throughout state government. It can generate huge amounts of savings. And if we find programs that aren't working, we either fix them or we end them. Take that money and apply it to things that are working. So I'm in favor of that. As far as what we can do in the budget long term, healthcare costs are really driving our state budget through Medicaid and uncompensated care. What Len didn't tell you is actually last year he proposed and voted for a budget amendment that actually would have cut over $1 billion out of healthcare for nursing homes and for kids who need healthcare for themselves and their parents. And that would have thrown lots of people out of nursing homes. That would have cut off lots of kids from getting health care. It was the wrong idea, and the Democrats voted it down for that reason.
The next question is from Russell Blair of the Record Journal to Steve Fontana.
Something that's been in the news lately, the risk reduction earned credit program, where inmates can earn time off their sentences for attending classes and programs. I wanted to get your thoughts if you were elected. Some people have called for immediately suspending it. Some people have called for reviewing it, adding more crimes where they're not eligible for the program. I just wanted to get your thoughts on the program and what you would do with it.
Sure. Well, Russell, as you know, I was not up there when they debated it, and I can't say that I have all the facts, but based on what I've read, I understand the general idea behind it, which is if you can figure out a way to keep people from coming back to prison, you can reduce your corrections costs and have a safer society. Having said that, I think that it does need to be suspended. I think there are enough questions about it that we really should not be in the business of moving forward until those questions are addressed to people's satisfaction. I think, as I said, recidivism is a huge problem in our corrections system. There's actually a friend of mine who teaches up in the Cheshire facilities. And what she finds is that about half of the people that she ends up trying to teach to get the GED equivalent education end up coming back into the prison system. And that's far too high. And so anything that we can do to reduce that level of recidivism, again, is a good thing. But clearly, this program has had some problems, and they need to be addressed, frankly. And we need to work through those problems, deal with them, and fix them before we move forward. So from my perspective, I would say we should suspend it until we have a chance to go through it all again, fix the problems, and move forward.
Mr. Fasano?
Yes, first of all, when Mr. Fontana talked about a bill that I voted on, that was part of an overall package. And it's not exactly the characterization. Obviously, he's going to slant the characterization, because the way the program was worked, the one that he's talking that we voted on, did not hurt elderly or kids. There was the idea that we do it for private and we were going to fund it, and that's the part he leaves out when he tells you I voted against it. But that's a scare tactic. As far as this program for risk reductions, it was a bad program. We shouldn't have done it. Nobody knows exactly how it works. As we sit here today, nobody knows exactly how it works. In other words, as your parole board says, no, we don't want to release you unless we have A, B, and C in place, but your good credits or risk reduction credits creep up on you, they overrule the parole board. That's wrong. When you ask the parole board, they say no. When you ask the program supervisors, they say yes. No one knows what's happening with this program. It should be suspended until we end up with the right answers that we need. In fact, we held a hearing, and Governor Malloy and his people refused to show.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Lisa Alves will ask the next question of Len Fasano.
Would you favor a change in the way the Senate of Connecticut lays and collects taxes? For example, would you repeal the sales tax and increase or modify the income tax?
Repeal the whole thing, no. But I think that what Governor Malloy did is send us down the wrong path. When he spoke, he said, we're going to go down a road less traveled. Well, I think all of us in the state of Connecticut know why that road is less traveled. We had a $1.8 billion tax increase in year one, and then almost another $1 billion in year two. With that, we have 9% unemployment. We have a sales tax that went from 6 to 6.35. We're taxing non-prescription drugs for the first time. That hurts everybody. All middle-class people and low-class people, low-income people get hurt by that. Anybody with a family gets hurt by that. We're taxing clothing under $50 for the first time. We took a home property tax, cut it by $300. These are things that we've done that have hurt this state, and our employment is at 9% in the state of Connecticut. And if you talk to any business person, they don't see a lot of glimmer of light out there. But that's what happens when you gamble. And Governor Malloy and majority said, I've got an idea. This is what we're going to do. And oh, by the way, Republicans, you're not allowed in the meeting. We're going to do it ourselves. And that's exactly what happened. And when you make a policy without including everybody at the table, generally it comes out with bad policy. Risk reduction, as we just talked about, is one of those policies. It is a bad policy. You have to bring everybody on the table. So I would roll back the sales tax. I'd bring back the property tax immediately. I'd take off the tax on non-prescription drugs, and I'd take off the tax on clothing under $50. Those are things I would do immediately. On the corporate earnings tax, that we went from 10% to 20% for larger corporations, and then we wonder why people don't move here unless we bribe them. We should roll that back to the 10%. There was talk some time ago to get rid of it, and then as the economy got bad, we kept it. Now we doubled it. So I think those are the things that do hurt our economy, and those are the things that hurt our businesses, and that's why we're in a tough financial shape.
Mr. Fontana?
Thank you. There's a real difference between my opponent and myself on this issue, and I think what Governor Malloy tried to do was try to bring some amount of tax fairness to our tax system. If I were to ask by show of hands, how many people here paid income taxes in 2009? My guess is, see a number of people, right? Congratulations, we all paid more than Bank of America. Bank of America paid 0 in income taxes in the state of Connecticut in 2009. So we all paid more than that, clearly. Now, is it fair that Bank of America should pay nothing and that we all should pay more in income taxes to the state than that? No. The fact is, and Len's too modest. His amendment last year that he voted for would have cut $1 billion out of nursing home care and care for Husky kids. Why? Because he didn't want to tax millionaires and corporations. That's the difference we're talking about here. Tax fairness, ensuring that we try to bring the burden down on the middle class and seniors, ask millionaires and corporations to pay their fair share, and not gut social safety net programs like Husky and Medicaid for seniors in nursing homes.
Thank you. Denise Perez will ask the next question of Steve Fontana.
What specific proposals do you have to make our state and our communities more energy efficient? Would you advocate green technology or a return to nuclear power plants as a solution?
Excellent question, Denise. I was chairman of the Energy and Technology Committee for 4 years when I was in the House, so I do know a little bit about this. Certainly, we have to do a lot more of what I would call the low-hanging fruit, which is the energy efficiency and energy conservation. And in fact, in 2005, the first public hearing that my committee held was on the subject of energy conservation and energy efficiency. And I'm pleased that over the time that I was chair, I moved us as a state toward energy conservation and efficiency, because we need to be a national leader in that because of where we are in our energy system. In terms of nuclear power plants, that's not the right answer. Nuclear power plants are very expensive to build, they're very risky, and the fact is you still have to dig nuclear fuel out of the ground using fossil fuels. So that's not the right approach. I think the best thing to do in the short and medium term is, again, do some of the things the governor's talked about. Transition to natural gas, particularly for heating our homes and businesses, because it's very efficient, it's cheaper, and cleaner. We also need to continue to make investments in renewable energy, particularly solar. We actually get more sun here in Connecticut than they get in Barcelona, Spain. So we can actually do a good job of promoting solar photovoltaic and solar thermal energy. We should be exploring wind and other new technologies. And beyond that, we should be focusing on bringing the rates down for everyone. People here in Wallingford do a great job with low rates. We need to try to bring those lower rates to everybody in Connecticut. When I first got to General Assembly in 1997, we had the highest rates in the country. Guess what? 15 years later, we still have the highest rates in the country. So clearly, deregulation didn't work. Unfortunately, we were sold a bill of goods by Enron, and this business community believed in the short term that we could bring costs down, which we did. The problem is we went to a deregulated system that now doesn't use the kind of tools that we have to bring rates down long term. Competition by getting utilities back into the business of generation, along with pooling everybody in the state to bring their demand together, can help get us the best rates by negotiating with companies out in the private sector.
Mr. Fasano?
Thank you. Energy is a big issue. When Steve was chairman of the Energy Committee for 4 years, in 2005, a bill did not come out until December, 9 months after session closed. In 2006, no energy bill came out at all. In 2007, there was a split on the committee. And in 2008, no energy bill came out. So out of 4 years, only twice out of his committee did energy bills come out when we had the highest rates, bar none, in the nation. When Mr. Fontana talks about we need to lower rates, what he's talking about is procurement. What he's saying is that the state should buy the power and then determine the rates of who gets the power, the consumers. Wallingford's got a great electric company here. We've got low rates. We're able to keep people here. We're able to keep businesses here. We can't afford to have the state of Connecticut tell us how much we're going to charge our consumers here in Wallingford. That's crazy. We have a good system going here, but his system is let the state run the electrical plants. It's doomed for failure. We all know that most of the if they do that, the states will make the big cities have lesser rates.
Thank you very much. Russell Blair will ask the next question of Len Fasano.
Len, I wanted to get your thoughts on Governor Malloy's First Five program, where companies are given incentives in terms of grants and loans to bring jobs to Connecticut or to stay in Connecticut or open a new headquarters, things like that.
Boy, this time flies so fast when you get asked a question. The First Five program, I got to tell you, I think that the idea was good to begin with. I know that a success of the First Five program, I'll point to two that I think were successful. The Quebecor building in North Haven, an Australian company came in, didn't have any business in Connecticut, let alone North Haven, in fact, not even the United States. And they came from Australia, took over an existing building, readapted it to its use, perfect, brought jobs. NBC Sports going to Stanford. Maybe a little bit of a price tag on there, but I think that's something good. But when we see the First Five program giving money to Cigna, and we see it moving companies from Cheshire to New Haven, when we see it giving $115 million to a hedge fund where the CEO is making $3.9 billion, and I've said this before, that $115 million is a rounding error on his tax returns. When we're doing things like that, that makes no sense. We're giving Jackson Labs $300 million for 290 jobs. It was supposed to be 300, and now the governor said, well, the 10 jobs that UConn's creating is going to count towards that 300. So if you're looking at that, I think that is a failure. I'd rather take that money, put it in a low interest rate loan that community banks lend to local communities and local businesses around here. Let the banks keep the interest, return the principal to the state, and work it out that way, because I think local communities could do a better job. But the problem with the First Five is it's too big a price tag. And basically what we're saying is we can't attract businesses here because our climate's unfriendly. So we have to pay them to come here, and that doesn't make sense. Look at New Hampshire. They do not pay anybody to come in. What they feel is you keep your rates low, you keep your cost of doing business in the state low, and people will open up businesses. They have no program near the First Five program.
Mr. Fontana?
First, the First Five was a good idea. It's bringing a plant to North Haven, a combined venture between an Australian and Arizona company. But clearly, the small business programs are the ones that are running out of money, and we need to reallocate that money to the small business programs, which we know that work. So I'd be in favor of doing that. Getting back to the energy thing, I think, unfortunately, when Len talks about energy, he really doesn't know what he's talking about more often than not. The fact is, in 2005, we actually passed a bill in June, 2 weeks after the session ended, and I'm hoping after this thing is over, he can check with his aide who's back there, he can look it up, and then Len can apologize for getting that wrong. The fact is, the bill had a lot of private sector, market-based incentives, tax credits, loans, grants, and other private sector things that were going to help get us out of a $2 billion hole the federal government was going to put us in. And he was one of 7 people in the Senate who voted no, and I've never found out why.
Luther Trammell will ask the next question of Steve Fontana.
Steve, let's stick with energy while we're on the topic. For the first 2 years of Governor Malloy's administration, he and Commissioner Esty have spent a lot of time saying we're not going to bet on one single type of technology, one single type of fuel. Now, within the past couple of weeks, the governor's come out with his comprehensive energy plan, and lo and behold, the foundation for it is focused on natural gas. Do you agree with that? And if you don't, what would you do to change it?
Well, as I was sort of talking about earlier, Luther, as a short-term measure to save people money, and get to a more efficient system, it will help us to move to natural gas from oil. Long term, it's not a solution. And I think in general terms, you're right. You don't want to try to pick winners and losers in the energy sphere. And during my time as chairman, I tried not to do that. That's why we gave money to fuel cells. We supported solar energy. We even supported other technologies like ground-based recirculation. So there are a number of technologies that need to be supported. But the bottom line is natural gas is cleaner, more efficient, regulated, plentiful, cheap, and home heating oil is all those things that it's not. So as a tool to get us away from relying on oil, I think it's a good move. But long term, we need to focus on, again, making our homes and businesses more efficient, getting away from even fossil fuels. That's why I'm a big proponent of wave, wind, solar, even importing hydro from Canada and Maine, because I think we have to draw more from renewable energy sources that don't put us at the mercy of fossil fuels wherever they come from. Long term, like I said, the governor also talked about energy efficiency and conservation, and we have a huge ability to pursue that beyond where we already are. We're doing a great job, but we need to do much more, and we can do much more in that. Beyond that, like I said, Luther, I think we have to be open to different things, but again, not bet on any one technology. Even fuel cell technology. There are a lot of fuel cell companies in Connecticut, and they do great work, but the fact is that's the most expensive form of energy, and it's not even entirely renewable because it's drawing on natural gas. So there are a lot of things we can do and should do, but the natural gas transformation, especially along where lines already exist. I'm not in favor of just plowing pipes and lines into the ground, leading off into all sorts of areas. There are plenty of people who live on, near, or adjacent lines who could get it.
Thank you. Mr. Fasano?
Thank you. Although Steve claims I don't know enough about energy, I will tell you that Governor Malloy and the Commissioner of DEP brought me into the meeting that we worked on during the spring and the summer, the very project that Governor Malloy came out with on that Friday. I had met with the commissioner several times about the policies, and I was invited by the governor's office, me personally, to represent the Republican Senate. With that, let me say, the point of that was that right now, natural gas is low because of the reserves that we found and the other ways that they're trying to get it out of the ground. Fuel cell technology is critical when it's used on a natural gas line, and that's why pushing for the natural gas also will spur the fuel cell technology. In that bill also, or not a bill yet, it will be a bill. It's going to make a show around the state. But in that is going to be conservation measures for energy efficiencies. So the bill has multiple parts, the big part being the natural gas line, then we have the fuel efficiencies, and we also have the cell fuel technology, which is very important.
Denise Perez will ask the next question of Len Fasano.
What is your plan to attract new businesses to Connecticut and retain the current businesses that reside in our state?
Well, being a guy who runs a business and being a guy who knows about businesses as a lawyer, I give a lot of advice to businesses, and I run my own business, not my law practice, another business. I know what it is to run a business. We need to streamline regulation process. We need to streamline permitting process, and you could do that by a variety of ways. I don't think the state uses the technology enough. When you make an application to DEP and DOT because you have a big project, they each have their own little forms that you have to fill out with all duplicative stuff, including mapping that's duplicative. You could do that all through the computers and have one major, if you would, application, and then a subpart. It's kind of like when you apply to colleges. You have a general application, and then each college asks for little subparts. Same type of thing that we could do with the permitting processes. That will make it easier. We need to put guidelines, like for municipalities, if they apply to a DEP for a permit, and they don't get a permit answer within 90 days, it's deemed approved. Well, that's not true for individuals. Why can't we have the same rules? So we need to look at those issues. We also need to look at the costs that we go through, not only energy costs and healthcare costs, but we need to look at the taxing costs. Because a corporation or business is taxed a personal property tax, they have the sales tax, they have the unemployment tax, they have insurance, which essentially acts like a tax. So you have a lot of costs of doing business. We need to drive those costs down. Connecticut is the fourth most unfriendly state to open up a business in based upon the business climate. total tax, total obligations. And that's the reason why we have a difficult time attracting people. Finally, we need to bring loans to our small businesses because small businesses cannot get loans from banks. Banks are very, very tough, and that's why I'm saying take some of the first 5 money, put it into that. We should also fund our unemployment tax so they don't have to pay such a hefty unemployment tax.
Thank you. Mr.
The biggest things we can do to attract new businesses and help the ones that are here and grow new businesses, I believe, is reduce the energy and healthcare costs. And I have specific ideas in both those areas, and you can find them on my plan, which is on my website, stevefontana.com. So the plan is up there now and will be up there over the next couple of days. Bottom line is, energy costs and healthcare costs are far larger for most businesses than taxes. In fact, Ernst & Young last year said that Connecticut has the lowest effective corporate tax burden in the country. So if we want to make Connecticut more competitive, we have to focus on the things that really drive costs in the state, and those are energy and healthcare costs, and I've got some specific ideas. Bottom line, I also agree that we need to focus on getting capital into the hands of small businesses because they're the ones that can grow and keep jobs here. I think we also need to focus on getting them the technical assistance they need to expand. And finally, we need to leverage UConn and Yale because between renewable energy, biopharmaceuticals, and other forms of investment in cutting-edge research, we should be leveraging our higher education institutions.
Russell Blair will ask the next question of Steve Fontana.
Steve, you lost in 2010, the last election, running for your seat in the State House. What did you learn from that defeat, and why did you choose to run again and for a higher office?
Well, I think what happened was I was a casualty of a large wave election. We had large wave elections in 2006 and 2008 when a lot of Republicans lost, and we had a large wave election in 2010 when a lot of Democrats lost. The bottom line is, what I learned is that there's value in reconnecting with your community, listening to people, talking to people about what's going on in their lives. Too often, when you're up in the Capitol all the time, you live in a bubble, and you think that everybody thinks like you and has the same circumstances that you live in. And what you realize is that there's a difference, that people not only are struggling, but quite often their voices aren't being heard. And that's why I've been talking about, in this campaign, the middle class and rebuilding the middle class, because that really is our top priority and should be our only priority. And I have a 4-point plan on my website that talks about what we need to do to start rebuilding the middle class, because if we continue going down the pace and the road that we're on, we will not only not rebuild the middle class, we will lose the middle class and it will disappear. And in fact, that's what I've been hearing from people when I've gone door to door every day since May. In fact, the last couple of months here in Wallingford, people tell me that, in fact, they think it's already gone. They say it's only the wealthy and the rest of us. And that's a really frightening prospect. If people in this town, in this district, and in this state have given up on the idea that the middle class needs to be part of what makes our country great, because frankly, we pursued policies in the 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, and 70s that built the middle class, the biggest, broadest middle class that the world's ever known. And the fact is, people want to keep the middle class. They want to join the middle class, and if they're in the middle class, they want to stay in the middle class. So in what I learned from the process of that defeat was reconnecting with people and in terms of what they wanted government to do. They don't want gridlock. They don't want a lot of finger pointing and blame gaming. What they want is people who have a plan, who know how to get things done, who can go up to Hartford and get results so that 2 years from now they can say their lives are a little bit better.
Mr. Fasano?
Russell, is that the same question?
Well, I guess for you, the question could be, this is the first time you're running opposed. Have you changed your campaign at all? Do you approach this election any differently?
No. You know, when I am not opposed in years past, I put out signs. I went out. I go to every event I can. I meet and I talk to people. And, you know, you're right. Steve's right. You could be in a bubble when you're up there. But being a politician is not a career path. I'm a husband, a father of 3. I have 3 kids that are 2 in college, 1 is in nursing school. I want them to stay in Connecticut. I want to see them grow, and I want to be with their kids and my grandkids. Well, I've got to make this place desirable for them to be here because they've gone to college in other states. They know what it's like to live in other states and how the cost of living is less. I have to find something that keeps my kids here. And as a family guy and a business guy, that's the reason why I keep fighting harder, because I want my kids to stay in the state of Connecticut.
Luther Trammell will ask the next question of Len Fasano.
Len, a little earlier, Steve mentioned as part of his discussion of energy the need to have getting the legacy power providers back into generation in this state. I think both of you during your time in Hartford have experienced the NIMBY attitude that a lot of people have when it comes to siting power lines and power plants. I'd like you to, do you think it's possible to build any new power plants in this state in a timely and cost-effective manner?
It's a good question, Luther, and I think it depends upon the communities. But you are right. It is a NIMBY state, and I think that that's just the nature of people, and I get that. I mean, that's just human nature. I would disagree with Steve Fontana in that I believe nuclear may be an option that we need to look at. I know Governor Malloy believes nuclear is an option that we need to look at. And I think that that's something that we have to look at, that we have some existing plants that we could rehab and put back online, which is not going to cause too much of a fuss. But, Mayor Dickinson always says that electricity is the mother of our technology and the lifeblood of our technology, and that is true, and we need it. So I think we have to put that in the beginning of any story that we talk about for Connecticut for policies. I think Deep Commissioner Dan Esty is doing a good job in looking at it. He does have the ability in the background to talk about energy. He's written some books, Green of Gold and others. I may not agree with all the policies that he talks about in Green of Gold because I read that book, but I do agree that he understands the importance of finding other alternatives and building an infrastructure. And that is going to help us in our businesses and our communities. So I think the gas line is the best place to look first, and I think looking at our existing power plants for rehabbing them is a second alternative.
Follow up on your question, Luther. We have extended the lifespan of the Millstone nuclear power plants out in Waterford, and in fact, I believe we may continue to do that. But they are coming up upon the end of their projected scheduled life, and I believe it also may be something that may not be within our control as a state. It may be under the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, in which case we can't have any control over when that nuclear plant actually has to shut down. I would say there's a right way and a wrong way to site production of any size. Certainly, there was a very large gas plant that was going to be sited in Middletown until they had a horrible, tragic accident. But it's also the case they've got peakers, I believe, in Meriden. They've done them in Milford. So I think depending on the size and the community and the location, we can find places where it works. But I think having a decentralized, efficient system is probably our more prosperous and profitable long-term approach than trying to put massive power plants in any one location.
Lisa Alves will ask the next question of Steve Fontana.
What specific project or issue do you want to address that would target the towns you represent? Would it cost the state any money to address this specific concern, and why is this issue project so important?
Excellent question. There are 4 towns in the district: East Haven, North Haven, Wallingford, and Durham, the western half of Durham. So each community has its own different needs. Certainly in North Haven, we have a couple of projects that need funding, and in fact haven't received funding, whether it's renovating a playground or some parks or what have you. But every town's different. I think there has to be a priority on building the new train stations in Wallingford and North Haven. I would say those are priorities. But truthfully, I need to respond as a legislator to the interests of the leaders of the community. So it's about meeting with Mayor Dickinson, First Selectman Frieda, First Selectman Francis, and Mayor Maturo, and saying, what is it that you want to see in your community, and how can we work with you to get those things done? Certainly there are people who approach and have approached me in the past about things that they want in their community. That's how I helped work with Len's predecessor to get floodlights from Monowies Field to help light those baseball fields down in the Monowies section of North Haven. So certainly people will approach me in my capacity as a legislator and ask me for help going around the governmental process. But I think what you want to do is you want to respond to the interests and the needs of the First Selectman or the mayors in terms of what they want to see in their community. So each community is different. There's a bridge in East Haven that desperately needs to get fixed promptly, so that's something that may be of a concern to them. Certainly in North Haven, we have the Pratt & Whitney site that's looking for redevelopment, so that may be a priority. It really depends on what it is that the leader of a community really wants.
Mr. Fasano?
and that's true. I mean, the community that we represent, we have to do what the local government wants to do, and they have to set the priorities for us. And then when we go up there, we're fighting with other priorities from other districts and other towns that may have bigger issues than maybe what we have. And we do fight for every dollar that's there. But that being said, I think our bonding, our credit card is totally charged out. We're facing a deficit already. We just got off a deficit. We have borrowed about as much as we can borrow. I think we need to set priorities of what we're going to borrow for. I mean, last bonding commission, we went and bonded money. So we borrowed money to put parks and fix some parks in Hartford, which are probably well needed. But when you're talking about having a huge tax increase in deficits, we need to prioritize what we need to do. And we should do it education. We should do it for health and services. We should do it for DOT projects and for safety issues. And we should really limit those to those issues.
Russell Blair will start the last round and ask a question of Len Fasano.
Something that I've heard from candidates running for office across the state is that when they talk with business owners, they say that they have job openings, but they don't have the employees. They can't find people in the state that are trained, whether it be technology, manufacturing. Do you think there's anything more the state could do to better prepare people graduating from colleges and high school for these kind of jobs?
Russell, you're right. We did a jobs tour, I don't remember if it was a year or two ago, frankly, and actually a year ago before we did the governor's jobs plan, and we heard the same thing. A lot of the high-tech manufacturers, and these jobs pay well, upwards of close to six figures, if not in the six figures. And what they said was, the problem is we can't find kids to take these positions that are open. And I think that's a failure on the state's part. I think we need to fund our technology schools and our agricultural schools better. The ones in Wallingford are terrific. I think we need to fund those better, and we haven't done that. I think we also need to give a larger tax break to businesses who donate the equipment to the tech and the agricultures. For example, when a machine is, in this day and age, as we all know from our cell phones and iPads, after a year, the technology is almost old. In 2 years, it's obsolete. And people will trade in their equipment. And to the extent that we could give them a tax credit to trade it in to one of our schools so they could use it would be great. When we did the tour, somebody had to be about my age said, Len, that school is the same equipment that I trained on when I was there. So I think we have to do an obligation to fund our tech schools and agricultural schools to get these kids ready, because I think, if you have kids, kids love computers. They're very good on it. When we as adults have problems, we turn to the kids and say, hey, help us with the computers. And that's the technology. They're just learning by osmosis. And we can get these kids to do wonderful things, but we have to put the money into those programs, and we haven't. I think we also have to work very closely for more of an apprenticeship program with these manufacturing companies. We have one in place, but we have to be more aggressive in doing it, and we haven't been.
2 points. First, I do have a 7-point higher education plan on my website, stevefontana.com, Russell. So if you want to go to that, it'll talk a bit about how I want to make higher education more affordable. But there are 2 points in the plan that address your specific issue. First, we have to have a comprehensive statewide college business partnership arrangement. Every industry, every school has to have multiple formal arrangements with industries and companies in their region. We have to have that tight relationship. Beyond that, we have to make comprehensive throughout all state programs for education at the higher education level what I call cooperative education programs. Northeastern University does this. They do a great job. They integrate work and study. Whether you take a semester off at school and then a semester at work, or you work part-time while you're in school, or you take a year off at a time, Northeastern has become the model for how you get young people the work experience they need and the network of contacts to transition smoothly and effectively from a higher education world to the job.
Luther Trammell will ask the next question of Steve Fontana.
Steve, I'd like you to think very hard and come up with what you see as the single biggest failure that the Democratic Party in the state of Connecticut has had in the past 2 years.
Well, that's a good question. I can't say I've given it a lot of thought. I think certainly the governor has deserve great credit for what he's done to try to tackle all the problems that he was left by the previous administration, frankly, as well as people in the legislature, people like Len and myself. But overall, I think that if I were to choose one thing, I would say that I believe the governor's initial education proposal was a mistake in this respect. I think that he reached out initially, but didn't end up working with the people initially that he needed to ultimately have the help of in order to get past the legislation he got passed. And in fact, there were endless stories about some of his missteps. And I think even he expressed ultimately that he would have done things differently if he had the chance and the idea to do so. So I think clearly, if you want to make change, and I've done that over the course of my career, you have to bring people together initially, and you have to avoid doing the kinds of things that unfortunately happened, which is poking your finger in the eye of the people with whom you have to negotiate and work with and come up with a solution. So thankfully, the legislature worked on the plan and came together with the governor ultimately on a plan that I think will start to move us forward on education. And I think there probably will need to be more work done in that area. But I think that overall, the initial approach was the wrong one. So I think ultimately, whether it was with that or some of the negotiations with the state employees, I think ultimately they got to a good place, Luther. But if I were to draw a line between those two things, is that that's not how you make change. You do it behind the scenes, quietly initially, you bring people together, you work things out, and then ultimately it pays off in work product like what I got passed when I was chairman of my various committees, where I passed dozens of bills unanimously because I worked them out with Republicans, with the governor's office, with the stakeholders, the lobbyists, you name it, the advocates, and when you bring them all together and work it out in advance, you get things done.
Mr. Fasano?
And Len, in fairness, I'd like you to address the
give you that other
Republicans.
question.
I wasn't going to give you the Democrats.
Yeah, I figured.
Please pick the Republicans' biggest failure.
I think the Republicans' biggest failure is the inability to get their message out, that it is not about cutting government to bare bones, that it is about keeping safety nets there, protecting those who need the services of the state, but looking to cut in those areas where we can do consolidations but keeping safety nets. And I think we don't do a good enough job getting our argument across that there is a big difference between people who believe, well, Republicans just want to slash and burn and everyone on their own. And that's not our theory. Our theory is that we need to keep the safety nets, but there's a certain part of government that's spending too much, and there's a certain part of government that's inefficient, and we need to cut that waste away. And I don't think we do a good enough job articulating that position.
Luisa Alves will ask the next question of Len Fasano.
The state of Connecticut has pensions obligations that are underfunded and in danger of not being able to pay its retirees in the future. What do you propose to do to remedy this situation?
I just didn't hear the beginning of the question. I apologize, Louise.
The state of Connecticut has pension obligations that are underfunded and in danger of not being able to pay its retirees in the future. What do you propose to do to remedy this situation?
First of all, we have the highest unfunded pension liability, if not the highest, within the top 5 highest unpensioned liability in the state of Connecticut. And let me tell you how that happens. How that happens is when there's a budget, and the budget says, you know what, it's a tough year, we can't do it this year, so rather than funding the pension plan $100 million, we're going to not fund it the $100 million, and we're going to use it for operating capital. That's wrong. I've never voted for such a budget. That's wrong thing to do. And that's done over a period of years and years and years, and that's where we are. We need to prohibit that practice from happening. So that's number one. We need to put safeguards in that doesn't allow us to do it. Because when you're a private person and you have a pension plan and you don't make the pension obligation, you can actually face criminal proceedings. The legislature doesn't have that knife hanging over their neck. So we need to change it to make sure that cannot happen. That's number one. Number two, we need to do a long-term plan and put in our budget a line item that starts to pay back the pension plan, because not only are they underfunded, we're paying interest on that money. So we need to start to pay back the pension plan. A couple of years back under Governor Rell, when we had a good year, we did bond $1 billion, I believe it was $1 billion, to put into the teachers' pension plan to help get that caught up. We're still behind. But we should put in a plan, should be a line item, just like you would do if you're in business and you've made a borrowing, that every year's debt service, you need to pay this off. We just don't have the will. This year alone, we're supposed to pay off a bond that the legislature borrowed some money when it was in a shortfall, and rather than paying off the bond, it felt it would go into a deficit. It said, okay, we're not going to make that payment this year, forget about it. And that's wrong. That's bad accounting, but we get away with it.
Mr. Fontana?
Len's correct. We did several years ago refinance our debt as far as the teachers' pensions were concerned. That was the right thing to do, save us a lot of money over the long term. Beyond that, we should be doing what I think they're doing right now, which is essentially saying if we have to make cuts elsewhere, we have to honor our obligations, which means we have to start making up for the years where we didn't put enough money aside by putting more than what we need to put aside to do it. Now, is that going to be sufficient? I don't know. But certainly that's something that we need to do, and we have this obligation to people, and we have to address it in a way that makes sense. Clearly, we can bring the unions back to the table and talk about what we can do to try to manage that. There is no simple answer to it. But I think the things that we have been doing are certainly all things that we should be doing, and there's probably more we need to work on.
Denise Perez will ask the next question of Steve Fontana.
How do you plan to help alleviate the burdens of college-bound students and their families?
I'm sorry, the question was college?
How do you plan to help alleviate the burdens of college-bound students and their families?
Excellent question. That's why I have a 7-point plan about making higher education more affordable. I'll try to get it done in 2 minutes. First, the thing is you have to do that cooperative education program. You have to get students the skills they need, the work experience, the contacts, as well as the ability on the margins to save money or set money aside and work while they're in school. Second, you have to do online programming. Harvard's doing this, MIT's doing this, Berkeley's doing this. We have to make online education a meaningful option. Beyond that, we have to look at 3-year degrees. Wesleyan's doing this, other schools are doing this. This is a way of helping young people get out of school more quickly if they know what they want to do. Beyond that, free and low-cost textbooks. The state systems in Washington and California are all doing this as a way of trying to help students save money on textbooks. We need to be reserving more spaces in our higher education system for Connecticut students. Currently, some states leave fewer spots for out-of-state students than we do. It seems to me that if you want to afford to go to college, it may make a difference whether you can go to UConn or whether you have to look at a private school that could cost a lot more. Certainly, I talked about those private sector college business partnerships. We need to do those as well. Beyond that, there's one other part of it that I'm forgetting, and I apologize for that. But the point is that we have to do all these things, but we can do them without spending a lot of additional money. The fact is we can do them if we start challenging the status quo, if we essentially say we have to rethink how we provide a higher education for the 21st century. We shouldn't rely on the system that we developed over the course of several hundred years. What we need to do is say, okay, how can we respond to your needs as a student? Because you are our future, frankly. As you go, so do all of us go. So we need to focus, I said, on trying to find ways to give you credit. That was the 7th one, giving you credit for professional experience, military training, volunteerism, those things that you've done elsewhere in your life that you can use and apply to education that you get. If we focus on those 7 things, I think we can find ways to make it more affordable for you so you and your parents don't come out with debt.
Mr. Fasano?
On the way here, I heard a staggering statistic on the way here that the average graduate from college now carries a $22,000 loan when they leave college. I just heard that as driving in. And here's the thing. In Connecticut, we have to get better control of how we're spending money at the university system. The Board of Regents, I don't know if you're familiar with that, but that was a bill that Governor Malloy pushed through that basically consolidated the universities under the Board of Regents. This Board of Regents just gave themselves, as it turned out unlawfully, a $300,000 salary increases across the board. Not each one got $300,000, collectively $300,000 increases at a time when no one's getting that type of money. It's out of control. We need to get the control costs of our colleges so we could bring down the tuition costs. What we're doing is we're allowing professors to retire and come back at almost a full salary, and it's been getting a little out of control. And that's been separate from our system. We need to pull that back in. We need to revamp it and take a look at it.
Thank you. That concludes the question and answer portion of the program. Each candidate will now have 3 minutes to make a closing statement. Mr. Fontana, will you please begin?
Thank you, Ann. Again, thank you to the panel. Thank you to the audience. Thank you to those watching on TV. Thank you to the Wallingford Community Women and Public Access. And thank you to Len. This is really a critical election. And we say that every 2 years, but I think truthfully, this really is. Because this is about the middle class and whether we're going to have a middle class or not. The reason that the work that I've done over the last 2 years was so important to me was because by getting a chance to step back, you can see the forest for the trees. And what I realized was going around talking to people as I have in Durham, East Haven, and Wallingford for the past several months, what I found is that people are deathly afraid that the middle class is disappearing if it hasn't already gone. And they say to me, Steve, that's not the country that I want to have, and it's not the country I want my kids and grandkids to have. The fact is we have a clear choice, and it's about priorities. My priorities are about rebuilding the middle class, and that's why I have a 4-point plan on my website that talks about what we need to do to get back to rebuilding the middle class. Now, it's true, we may not be able to do things the same way that we've done them, and that's why I've talked about challenging the status quo when it comes to making higher education more affordable, or dealing with some of the things that we talk about when we talk about promoting economic growth, small business jobs, and so forth. We have to challenge some very powerful interests up in Hartford, and you have to have people who are willing to stand up and do that. The concern that I have, frankly, is that on too many occasions, my opponent, and he's a nice guy and he's a good man, and we got along when we served together, but the fact is he's become too close to and in favor of millionaires and corporations in the votes that he casts and what he does. And the fact is, when I think about the people in this district, I think about the people like the woman I met off of Hellstrom Road in East Haven. She's a senior citizen, lives alone. House has seen better days. It's a small house. And she told me that she basically makes ends meet by Social Security, a credit card, and cash from her son. She's the kind of person we need to be fighting for. And unfortunately, on issue after issue, Len sides with millionaires and corporations. Whether it's cuts that he proposes or bills he votes against, the fact is he sides with them. And what we really need is people up in Hartford who side with the middle class. We need somebody who's going to build the middle class again, focus on what matters, and not get distracted by other things that people present to you up in Hartford as an issue. The fact is, what we need to do again is have somebody who has those priorities in place. I'm a fighter for the middle class, always have been, always will be. I've stood up for working class families, seniors, people who have to work for a living. That's what I'll do in Hartford for people in this district, and I ask for their support.
Thank you. Mr. Fasano?
Thank you. First of all, I want to thank everybody for participating. I want to thank the panel and everyone who showed up, and Mr. Fontana as well. I have been the state senator for the town of Wallingford for over 10 years, or just about 10 years, and I've enjoyed every minute of it. I've immersed myself into the community, and I know the people. There is a difference between Mr. Fontana and myself, and let me tell you what it is. Mr. Fontana believes that Governor Malloy is on the right track. Mr. Fontana believes that a $1.8 billion tax increase in 1 year is a good thing. Mr. Fontana believes another $800 million tax increase the second year is a good thing. I don't. That's the biggest difference between Mr. Fontana and myself. I don't believe raising the sales tax from 6 to 6.35 is a good thing. Mr. Fontana does, apparently. If you're talking about hurting the middle class, going from 6 to 6.35 is not going to hurt the rich. Doesn't mean that much, but it's going to hurt the middle class. Paying for non-prescription drugs. Seniors take a lot of non-prescription drugs. And if you have a family like I do, and your kids get sick, you pay a lot in non-prescription drugs. Now we're paying taxes. That hurts the average person. Losing your property tax credit from $600 to $300, that hurts the middle class. The middle class wasn't just squeezed out for the 2 years that Mr. Fontana was not in the legislature. This is 26 years of majority rule by one party that has meticulously set out a plan. And at the end of the day, you end up with your middle class being squeezed out. You end up with the tax day being May 5th, the furthest tax freedom day being May 5th, the furthest state than any state in the nation. So after May 5th, you've paid all your taxes, federal and state. But after May 5th, Connecticut is the furthest one out. Why? Because we tax too much. We make it too expensive to live in this state. That's what's squeezing the middle class out. I want my kids to live here. They can't afford a house here. Steve says I'm friends with millionaires. I don't even know who he's talking about, but if he knows who they are, let me know so I can go see them. I have no idea. I don't look at people's tax returns when I meet them. I'm friends with whoever I'm friends with. But I do know what it is to have a family in the state. I do know what it is to run a business in the state. I do know what it is to worry about employees. I do know what it is to worry about payroll. Because every week I worry about those things. And every day I understand what it is and the toils that you get when you raise a family and you have kids. So I am particularly concerned about the middle class. But I'll tell you this, he is right. They are getting squeezed out. He is right. They are leaving this state. He is right. We're not going to have a middle class. But not because what I've done. I'm a minority party. I can't do anything. I can't pass anything. His party is the majority party. For 2 years, they were the supermajority. No matter what Governor Rell wanted to do, they could override it. So it wasn't me, and it wasn't my party that got us here.
Thank you. This concludes the 34th Senatorial District segment of the 2012 Candidates Forum. On behalf of the Wallingford Community Women, I thank you for watching and remind you to vote on November 6th.